Welcome back to Bunnyfish Crafts for another little video about Scrappy blanket making. So if you haven't checked out the previous video, which is so you want to make a Scrappy blanket, 9 questions to ask yourself before you start a blanket, I would recommend starting there if you haven't made Scrappy blankets before. But if you have, then let me share with you my 3 favorite tips for Scrappy blanket making. There's nothing earth-shattering here, but I think that these are pretty important tips. So let's get started. Tip number 1, take notes. Your cast on amount, the number of rows or ridges per motif, the number of grams you need for a row or a motif or whatever, the yarn weights that you're using if you're using more than one. For instance, the nor'easterly is written for DK weight scraps, but maybe you're using 2 fingering weight scraps held together to make DK in addition to DK weight things, or maybe you're just making it in fingering weight. Some of my mitered square blankets I've used fingering sport and DK to make the squares, but I have notes on how many fewer stitches I pick up for sport versus fingering. Also, it's a good idea to keep track of your needle size, your start date if that's something that's interesting to you, like how long it took you to make the piece. And you can take notes on whatever you want, but those are some things that I like to note down. And there's different ways that you can take these notes if Ravelry is something that is accessible to you and you like to use it. It's a good digital way to take notes that you can remember later. If that's not useful, you could have a notebook, like a knitter's notebook, kind of like what I started at the beginning of 2022. And that is where all of my blanket notes are currently for all of my blankets. Or even something as simple as like an index card that you put in the project bag with the Scrappy blanket that you're making, because that index card can keep notes for you on yarn needs or needle size. The reason why those 2 things are super important there are 2 reasons why I think those things are super important. If you're making multiple blankets at one time, you might be using different needle sizes, and especially in the beginning, you might forget what needle or hook you're using in between each project. So that'll save you time there. Also, noting how many grams you need for something. Again, especially if you are making multiple blankets. I know some of my friends, one of the prize winners for #2022 Year of the Blankets requested, we were talking about their prize, they requested 10 gram minis because that 10 grams can be worked into all 4 of the blankets that person is working on. So 10 grams is needed for all of the blankets. It can be good to know things like that. Number 2, do the ends as you go. Nobody wants to deal with ends, but trust me, when you're looking at like 600 ends, it's way more frustrating than doing a few or 1 or something. And there are lots of ways to take care of your ends as you go. You can knit in your ends. Up here I'll put a video of how I knit in my ends when I'm doing miter squares, but there's lots of different ways. Natalie at Knitty Natty just put out a video of 4 different ways to weave in ends, which I think is super great for Scrappy projects. The Weave in Steven method is another method. I haven't actually watched those videos, but it comes very highly recommended from a lot of podcasters. And if you're crocheting, then what I like to do is crochet in the beginning tail and weave in the ending tail before I start the new yarn. Another thing you can do is weave in your yarn after every motif. So especially if you're doing something that's separate pieces, you can weave in those ends just as soon as you finish, so you don't have to think about it, and that is just ready to go for the next time you work. Maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you just get in the rhythm of the making and you just want to keep making. Sure. Another idea could be to weave in the ends from your previous section at your next section. So maybe when you answered the 9 questions, you decided that you were going to work on your blanket every single Scrappy Sunday. So maybe you take the first 10 minutes of your knitting time on Scrappy Sunday to weave in ends from the previous Scrappy Sunday. When I used to go to, I'm knitting on a sock as I'm recording, so if I'm looking down, that's what it is. When pre-pandemic, when there used to be social knitting at my yarn shop, every Wednesday I would bring whatever projects I had finished, knitting or crocheting, as well as my Scrappy project, and all of my ends for the week got woven in before I started knitting on anything. And it was kind of nice because then I had the projects, that anything that I had finished during the week, to show off to people, so it was already there. I had the designated time. I knew I was going to be sitting for a couple hours, so that worked really well for me a couple of years ago. So just figure out what works for you and change it up. If it's not working, designate a different time. Like maybe you know that this month you can weave in ends every Scrappy Sunday, but next month your schedule may change. It's just, I think, really important to designate a specific time to do ends, whether it's as soon as you finish this row, like every row, every Sunday, something. Because I promise, weaving in 600 ends, actually I can't promise this, I have only ever left myself like up to 20 ends to weave in at the end of a project, because I don't. But I can tell you that 20 ends is way less enjoyable to weave in than like 3 ends. But you can make your end weaving in fun too. Like part of the reason why doing end weaving at knit group was beneficial was that, you know, I could weave in the end and then I could be like, and then ta-da, now it's totally finished, and everybody could look at it. So that worked really well for me. Tip number 3 is pretty important, because sometimes, especially in the middle of a blanket project, it can become kind of a slog. Like the excitement of the casting on of the new project has worn off, and you've gotten into the rhythm of the pattern, and then the end is so far away. So how do you keep it fun? There are lots of ways. One is swaps, and you can find swaps lots of different ways. You can, if you're on Instagram, you can look up the hashtag yarn swap. Right around the holidays, there are so many yarn swaps. And you can also see if maybe some of your friends who, maybe you have friends who are making scrappy blankets, maybe they would like to swap skeins with you, or maybe your knitting friends would just send you minis, especially if they're not using them. I have friends who definitely don't make scrappy projects, so frequently when I go to the ZK, I come back with a lot of mini skeins from friends who just want the leftovers out of their stash and want them to go to a good home. And I am a good home for leftovers and minis, obviously. Other things you can do is join mini clubs, like mini skein clubs that indie dyers put out. There's something called Row 1 Minis, which is, I believe, I have never bought from them, but I believe that the way that works is every month they pair up with a dyer and then they send out some amount of mini skeins in either, I think it's 5 or 10 grams. Again, not an expert, just have heard about them. So that sort of thing is an option. Advent calendars are definitely an option. So those are sold throughout the year by different dyers, indie and otherwise, and they have different quantities of yarn at different price points. So look in on your favorite dyers and see if they're doing an advent calendar, because that could be a really fun way to spice up your scrap stash. And then another thing that you can do, if you already have minis and scraps and leftovers and just want to make it a little more fun, is make yourself a surprise package. So I made myself a countdown to my birthday. So these minis are yarns that I got from Allison. She gave them to me, we traded, we did a swap. So she gave them to me, and the packaging is from previous 2021's advent calendar. That's what Haley sent me the minis in. So I am going to do a countdown to my birthday, and I'm going to have to refill 3 of those because there's only 25, and my birthday is on the 28th of May. So I am going to, every day leading up to my birthday in May, and on my birthday, I'm going to open a little package of a mini, and then my goal will be to use up that entire scrap ball that day. So I don't know what blankets those are going to go in, but that's just a way to make it fun for me, because it's just fun. It's fun to open little packages, and they're so easy to set up for yourself, or have a friend or kiddos or someone else take your yarns and put them in packaging. So clearly all of those packages are indistinguishable, so I won't know which one I'm picking until then. If you are doing something with, distinguishable packaging, it might be more fun to have someone else do it. And also I'm setting that up in February for May, so there's no way I'm even going to really remember what those minis look like. And then I have a bonus tip for you, and this tip is kind of like an anti-tip, I guess. It's not like a tip, but it's okay to quit. So knitting and crochet should be fun. Scrappy blankets should be fun, and if it's not fun, maybe go back to, put it aside. If you still want to make a scrappy project, go back to those questions. Look at why you want to make this blanket, who you're making it for, what your needs are for the blanket, like practical and fulfillment needs for yourself, and do something else. So you can take the yarn that you've already worked into this minis project, and you can repurpose it for a different minis project, a different scrap blanket, or any project. You can rip what you put into the blanket. If you have a lot of progress on something and you're just not enjoying the process so much, what can you turn it into instead? Maybe you thought you were going to make a granny stripe throw blanket, but you get, this much work in, and you're like, I don't think so. Can you fold it in half and make a pillowcase? Can you, if you don't get very far at all, if you're only like this far, can it be a scarf instead? You don't have to make the blanket that you started out thinking you were going to make. And if all else fails, you can see if someone else might want what you started. At least twice, I have received hexapuffs for my kiddos' hexapuff blanket from friends who started making hexapuffs decided that that was not a thing that they actually wanted to do because it requires a lot of sewing and it can be kind of fiddly. They're small pieces. So see if someone else would like your start or can use it for something else. Or like maybe you're making, I'm making little flowers for a blanket, but if I started making that, actually, this is a perfect example. So I'm making flowers for my daughter for a blanket for my littlest human, who's not very little. But the plan is to have the blanket for when she moves out of my house. And when I started, I was just pulling all of the yarns in colors that I thought she would want. And then started thinking about it. And I started this project probably 2 years ago. And now I'm like, do I really think my daughter is going to be delicate with the blanket in a way that single ply yarns make sense to use in the blanket? And the answer is no. So I'm not going to do that. So I've pulled those motifs out and put them somewhere else, and I'm going to use them in a garland instead. So just because I thought they were going to be a part of the blanket doesn't mean they actually have to be a part of the blanket. Just because you think you're going to make a scrappy blanket doesn't mean you have to make a scrappy blanket. You can make a scrappy something else, and it will be just as fulfilling and exciting and scrap eating as a scrappy blanket would be. If you enjoyed these tips, I hope that you will hit the like button, leave me any questions or comments down below, and for more videos like this or other types of content I have on my channel, please hit the subscribe button, bell notification button if you want, and I will see you again soon. Good luck with your scrappy blanket. Bye, friends.